Ni hao y'all. Welcome to season 3 of Gong Fu Cha. It has been a long time and we're so excited to be back here at beautiful West China Tea House. So last season we talked about tea as a subject whereby we would talk about every different type of tea and tell you what made them what they were and how they taste and everything. And that's pretty straightforward. So this season we are going to be focusing more on Gong Fu Cha, the art of tea service as a practice, as part of your lifestyle, and what does it look like? And we're also going to be talking about tea house culture. We're in a tea house right now, West China Tea House, and we are enjoying the tea house vibe. So what does the culture of a tea house actually look like? So today we're going to zoom in on Gong Fu Cha, the Chinese art of tea service, as a practice, as a discipline. And I'm going to actually make some tea while I'm doing this, as is meat. I'm gonna go ahead and make some random tea today. I'm just gonna pull the tea coin that is at the top of this stack of random tea coins to my right off and let the gods decide what it is, except that I know it's Sheng because it's green and I can see it through the glass and I like Sheng. And it is Purple Grace. This is, for those of you who watched our purple episode from last season, which was one of my favorite episodes. I was really proud of my Christina Aguilera analogy. But this is one of those teas that we featured. It is the cloned cultivar of purple tea, where it's intentionally purple and it's been processed as a Sheng pu'er. It's a Zhen Cha. Big fan of this one. Also exciting because it's new in coin form. We've just got these and we haven't had it as a coin before. So I'm personally excited to drink it. Now that I'm not talking about one particular type of tea, I can just drink whatever I want. So great, and I drink Sheng because that's what I like. Go ahead and get this started. So what is Gong Fu Cha? We should probably revisit that. For those of you who've been watching for a long time, I apologize because I'm about to repeat myself more or less, but it bears repeating because Gong Fu Cha is not something that we are usually in contact with here, and it doesn't fit into our English language Western paradigms. Cha means tea. That third word, very straightforward. It just means tea, this kind of tea, the tea plant. And Gong Fu is a little bit more complex. It's a concept that we don't have in English. It's a very Chinese concept. It means a lot of different things, and we translate it as a skill acquired through mindful practice, because that's really what you're doing when you're cultivating Gong Fu. You can actually cultivate Gong Fu for anything at all. It doesn't have to be tea. We often think about martial arts because the same terminology, Gong Fu, is how you pronounce what we call Kung Fu in the West. We use this word Kung Fu to refer to Chinese martial arts. And in Chinese, people talk about martial artists as having Gong Fu, but they don't necessarily mean martial arts exclusively. You can have, martial arts is wushu. So Gong Fu is the skill that you cultivate when you're doing martial arts or making tea, or the example I like to use these days is chopping vegetables. You can see a chef chopping vegetables very skillfully and thin and fine, and they can just get these perfect little slices very, very quickly. And there's nothing that they can say to their apprentice that will give them that skill of chopping vegetables quickly and evenly. They just can show them how to hold the knife, they can show them how to breathe, they can teach them what to think about, how to hold their fingers so that they are not cutting their fingers off while they're chopping vegetables. But none of that in and of itself or collectively will give their apprentice the skill of cutting vegetables quickly and finely. They just have to put in the hours. They have to cut lots of vegetables. When they've cut thousands and thousands of vegetables, they will definitely be good at cutting vegetables. They will definitely have developed that skill of cutting quickly and cleanly and evenly and finely if they have been mindful while they've been cutting and mindful in their practice. So that's kind of a philosophical breakdown of Gong Fu Cha. It is that kind of skill cultivated with respect to pouring and serving tea. But what does that look like physically? Well, I'm doing it right now, and I'll break it down. Tea in vessel. Water in vessel. Water turn into tea. Tea go in second vessel. Tea go cup. And finally, very importantly, tea go mouth. So in modern speak, that is, we use a high dosage of tea relative to, let's say, a tea bag in a mug. This is 7 grams. These coins are 7 grams in this little gaiwan. It's a beautiful gaiwan. Thank you, Moncho, for letting us use this gaiwan. And then we steep the tea quickly. You notice I just did it for a few seconds, and we do it many times. And when we're doing that, we're taking the profile of the tea and we're spreading it out, stretching it out, allowing the leaves to unfold. Tea leaves unfold iteratively over the course of many steepings. You can see it still kind of looks like a coin now, but by the time we're done, it's just going to be a bunch of pretty looking leaves. And so when we're steeping tea in this way, instead of making one big kind of dilute steeping where all the flavors and fragrances and character of the tea is there at the same time, we are making multiple steepings where the tea is allowed to unfold and unfurl and express itself over the course of a kind of an arc. And you can think of it like taking a 3D picture. When you take a 3D picture, what you're really doing is taking many pictures of the same subject from different angles. And that's what we're going to be doing today, or that's what we do when we do Gong Fu Cha any day, is that we are experiencing the tea at different stages of its unfurling and unfolding and expression. And from that, we get this holistic 3-dimensional experience of the tea itself. And so that's Gong Fu Cha. Philosophically, linguistically, physically, what does it look like to be a person who does Gong Fu Cha and pours tea? What does it look like in your life? What does it look like to be on the path of cultivating this Gong Fu, this skill? Well, for me, it's looked lots of different ways. You know, from when I was in college, I would wake up before the sun and light a candle and make tea all by myself by candlelight to get ready for my day. And now I'll be serving tea to dozens of people over the course of a party at the tea house that goes till 3 a.m. And those are very different experiences. And both of those things are me cultivating my skill. And I think the most important thing of making this part of your life, if you want to cultivate that skill, is to do it a lot. That's the nature of Gong Fu, is that there's no shortcut, there's no replacement for practice. And if you want to practice something and get good at it, you have to be consistent at it. And the best way to be consistent at something is to have fun and enjoy it. If you have to force yourself to do something and exercise discipline to do something, then you're less likely to be consistent at it over the course of your life. Whereas things that require no discipline whatsoever to do, like watching TV or eating a cupcake, for example, things that really we don't want to do, or I don't want to do, and we probably should do less of, those are remarkably easy to do every day. Whereas something like going to the gym or practicing violin might be more difficult. But if you really love the violin and you really enjoy playing the violin, then practicing violin isn't difficult. It's fun because you look forward to getting your hands back on your violin. You know, you're at work and you're like, I can't wait to get home and get my hands on my violin and play. And part of that, and that's, my experience with tea is I have practiced tea. I've probably poured 10,000 pots of tea. Calculation, I started doing this when I was 20. I'm now 40. In order to pour 10,000 pots of tea, I would only have to pour 1.3 pots of tea per day over the last 20 years. And I have definitely poured more than that, substantially more than that. So, how did I accomplish that? Well, it wasn't something I was trying to accomplish. I wasn't keeping track, and I wasn't like, all right, I'm gonna get out there, I'm gonna pour some tea today, I'm gonna get my reps in. I just love pouring tea. Whether it's by myself, whether it's with people, I enjoy it. It makes up the bulk of my social life for my entire adulthood. And so that's the number one most important. And also like that violin player who just can't wait to get their hands on their violin and in the sheer physical, audio, tactile pleasure of playing and practicing their violin. That being divorced from fear of making mistakes is super important. Actually, I always tell my students when I'm teaching classes, making mistakes mindfully is better than doing it right unmindfully. Because when you're making a mistake, you're learning. Because the tea is giving you that feedback. It's making you be more mindful. It's like, oh, this tea is bitter. that means I must have done something wrong because I don't want the tea to be bitter. I don't think it's supposed to be this way. Let me see if I can change what I'm doing. And when you have practiced and cultivated this skill through having done it wrong and then correcting yourself, that is much deeper skill than you accidentally did it right, or this tea is easy and doesn't present any challenges. And so yes, it's good, but I maybe didn't learn anything from this one. And this is what I always tell people about challenging teas. If you have a tea that challenges you, that tea is probably meant to be one of your teachers that is gonna help you be better. But from the perspective of enjoying it and having that fun and being able to make it something that you want to do every day and you're not forcing yourself to do, divorcing yourself from the expectation of perfection is necessary, absolutely essential, and it has been for me as well. And then also exploring. That's one of the most important things with tea, and that goes along with fear of making mistakes. No one gets to decide how you make tea, but you. You make tea the way that you make tea, and it doesn't have to look like the way that I make tea. What's important is that you're enjoying it and you're being present for it. And so that can mean something as simple as, oh, everyone says you make green tea with cool water, but I'm gonna try making it with hot water and see what happens. I'm going to steep this tea way longer. I'm gonna boil this tea and see what happens. I'm going to add chrysanthemums to this tea and see how it is. I'm gonna put this in my fridge and drink it cold, you know? Or it could be taking this tea, oh, I took a Phoenix Oolong camping with me, and it's a really expensive Phoenix Oolong and I love it a lot. And then when I made it by the campfire using the water that I boiled on the fire, I realized I couldn't smell the delicate fragrance of the tea because all I could smell was the smoke from the campfire. But it was good and I enjoyed it. And maybe I couldn't smell it and maybe it wasn't the most perfect, precise expression of that tea, but I had this beautiful experience of being in the mountains and drinking the tea. Or maybe it's serving tea to your friends and being center stage for a minute, you know, being able to share and teach something to people that you care about. Or maybe it's serving tea to a problematic relative that you have a strained relationship with, and you can sit them down and make them tea, and you can bond over this experience of doing something that's interesting and maybe just avoid other subjects that make you mad at them. So I would say that having that curiosity and that sense of exploration is what helps you become a better tea pourer, because you are exploring for the sake of exploration. And really that's what Gong Fu Cha is exploration. The Gong Fu Cha is the vehicle through which we explore the landscape of Chinese tea. It's this huge landscape with all these peaks and valleys. And the way we explore it is we use this practice to try the teas and experience them in all of their different expressions. And so whether that's exploring one tea for your whole life and just trying it and just developing such a deep relationship with that one particular tea, or whether it's trying dozens and dozens of teas over the course of your tea drinking career, exploring and having that curiosity and wanting to learn new things about tea through the drinking and serving of tea is definitely one of the things that made me good at pouring tea. And you know, when you've been doing this for a long time, what does it actually look like to make it a consistent long-term part of your life? When I first started pouring tea, I wouldn't talk while I was pouring tea. And as you can see, I still cannot really pour tea and make an episode of this show at the same time super effectively, unless, as in the last season, pouring the tea was part of the show. Now I'm just supposed to do it and be drinking tea and talking about this whole thing. But when I first started drinking tea and pouring tea, I would spend a lot of time drinking tea by myself, in my room, making tea, drinking it, enjoying it. I didn't think of it as practice, but that's what it was. And then when I started serving tea to my friends, I wouldn't talk while I was serving tea because I was so focused on the pouring of the tea and getting the temperature right and tasting it, making sure that it's good, and kind of meta-analyzing it a lot, that I wouldn't have conversations. I would pour the tea silently, and then when I was done and people had tea in their cups and they were drinking it, then I would sit back and I would rejoin the conversation. I don't think anyone noticed it. They were talking. I wasn't talking. So it's not like we were drinking tea in silence. But I wouldn't talk because I didn't feel confident in my ability to both talk and serve tea at the same time. And then I realized after doing this for a few months I realized that I could start to talk and serve tea at the same time because my body, my muscle memory had got the act of serving tea covered. The physical, technical act of pouring water in the vessel and straining it and serving it. And so then I could rejoin the conversation. Then I could actually be part of the conversation because my body was handling the physical aspect and a very particular part of my mind that I have cultivated over these 2 decades. Even when I'm talking, even when my frontal lobe is thinking about the conversation, there's a very well-developed part of my mind that still is thinking about the tea, is still in, as I put it, I say it's still in the pot. It's still in the gaiwan with the tea, being present with the tea and thinking about it. If I'm doing my job well, that's what it's doing. And so that's the process of honing that skill sometimes involves internalizing things. I was able to pour tea and talk because I had internalized the basic steps. The things that I do with my hands had been internalized. And another example of this kind of from my early tea career, before I ever thought of it as a career, was when I first started pouring tea, I was very precise. Some of you may know that I majored in biology, in marine biology, when I was in school, which is also when I got into Gong Fu Cha. And so I approached it kind of with this scientific perspective where I was like, okay, I'm going to do repetitions, I'm going to run experiments, the temperature on the can says that I should do it at 185 degrees. So I'm gonna use my thermometer and my scale to get the dosage just right. And I'm gonna use my timer to make sure that I'm steeping it for the right amount of seconds that it says on the bag. And that was how I would make tea. And that lasted maybe a couple, and I would take notes. I'd be like, steeping 1 of tie guan yin, this temperature, this time, these are the notes that I got from it. And I'm not saying that that is not valuable. That is super valuable. I think because I did that, it helped me improve my skill very fast, very early on. But soon I abandoned that. Not only because I am not super scholarly like that as a person, but also because I had moved on from focusing on that numerical temperature and I was really responding to the tea dynamically. This tea might want to be steeped at temperature A right now, but next steeping wants to be steeped at temperature B, and there's no real way to account for that. And it's going to change from day to day, and it's going to change with the hardness of the water and the temperature and humidity around me, et cetera, et cetera. And so I had to relinquish that association with the temperature and the timing and be more dynamic. And so 10 years into this process, I would be making tea like this. I would pour the water in my gong dao bei and to let it cool. And then I would take my vessel and I'd be smelling it and feeling the water. And I would just feel and smell when the water was right. And I still teach this technique to my students, and I still think it is the best way to start making tea and get the perfect temperature for your tea, because it takes away that numerical temperature and replaces it with a somatic feeling, something that you can always have with you, that you don't need a thermometer. And I did it that way. And I did it for pretty much every tea. I would do that. I would get a different particular temperature for every steeping of every tea that I would determine by using this technique. And then fast forward another 10 years, here I am 20 years in, I don't actually cool my water for most teas anymore. I actually just use boiling water straight from the kettle on most teas. And what I'm doing is that I'm compensating for the temperature by changing my pouring technique. And that's what I teach in my advanced class. But that is my Gong Fu that I've cultivated over a long time, is that now I'm controlling my water, the way it goes onto the tea, the way it goes off of the tea more, and therefore I can relinquish my control over that temperature. And when I first moved to China, I noticed this. I noticed these like tea masters, real tea masters, people who make tea farmers, just pouring boiling water on every single tea. And I was like, wow, okay, interesting. I guess this tea needs boiling water. Then I would do it. It would be terrible. I'm like, what are they doing? Well, I practice and now I do that too. And so part of the process of getting good at pouring tea and cultivating your Gong Fu is relinquishing the attachment to the form. Gong Fu Cha is not a formal practice, right? The way that it looks when you pour tea is not what's important. What's important is the connection between me as the server and the tea, and that connection is silent and invisible It's just about me and the relationship that I've made with the tea. Speaking of which, let me make the tea. Pay attention and make the tea. I always say the right way to make tea is to pay attention. The wrong way to make tea is to not pay attention. When I first moved to China, I was using a technique for making sheng pu'er that I had been practicing the whole time. Basically the same technique as making green tea, because sheng pu'er is a type of green tea. And that's that I would do what I just described. I'd cool the water down, I'd smell, I'd feel, I'd pour it when it was just right. And that's how I'd make my sheng pu'er. And then when I met a guy named Xiaoyan, who's from Hunan. Funny story, how I met him. I think I talked about it in one of the earlier episodes, so I'm not gonna reiterate it, but it's a fun one. Great guy, good friend. He lives in Hunan, and he is part of this like club of sheng pu'er lovers, enthusiasts. These guys only drink sheng pu'er. They really only drink Gong Fu Cha. They're like super just about sheng. They've got like a clubhouse with bookcases that are fake bookcases that open onto hidden rooms where they like drink their specialties. So anyways, cool group of folks. He taught me a technique for steeping sheng pu'er that was completely different than what I'd been doing. And he was like, because this is all they do. He's like, don't cool your water. Use boiling hot water and pour the water differently. And he taught me this technique for pouring sheng pu'er where I didn't cool my water. And it's a much better technique. And when he served me some sheng, just some fresh mao cha, using this technique, I was like, wow, it really came alive. It was amazing. It had this depth and sweetness that I had never really tasted in sheng before, even though sheng is my favorite kind of tea. And so I started practicing it. And the first time I did it, my tea was worse because I had no gong fu for this new technique. I tried doing it and my tea was super bitter because I hadn't perfected that skill. I hadn't practiced it. I hadn't put in the hours. And so my clumsy attempts with this new technique were worse than my polished attempts with my old technique, but I let go of my attachment to the tea being good, accepted that I was gonna make mistakes, and I practiced it, and I got better at it, and now it's the only technique I use for sheng, and it has definitely upgraded my ability to steep sheng pu'er by orders of magnitude versus what I did before. And so a lot of times when you are wanting to grow in your practice, you need to unlearn things. I had to unlearn my old way of making sheng pu'er and do things that would have seemed like the wrong thing to do before. And what's really important is to remember that tea is folk culture. It is not dogmatic. There's not one right or wrong way to do it. You're making your own way when you're doing it. So I think that's probably the most salient advice I could give to anyone who wants to make this a part of their lifestyle is make it your own, enjoy it, have fun, make mistakes, make it a personal practice. And don't be afraid to change what you're doing. Don't be afraid to forget what you've learned. And there's actually the what I just said where 20 years ago, I would use a stopwatch and a thermometer, and then 10 years in, I would feel the water, and then now I just use boiling water pretty much all the time. Reminds me of a story that I used to tell a lot. When I was first working at Jade Leaves Tea House way back in the day, I had a copy of the Zhuangzi, the work of Zhuangzi, who's the second author of Taoism. There's Lao Tzu who wrote the Tao Te Ching, and then there's Zhuangzi. And Zhuangzi's work is part of the Taoist corpus. And there's a beautiful translation of his work by Thomas Merton that I had a copy of this, a thin little volume that I would keep at the tea house. And I would read this story to demonstrate what is Gong Fu. When I was talking about this and having this exact same conversation 15 years ago, wow. Then I would pull this book out and I would share this story, cutting up an ox from Zhuangzi, and it goes, Prince Wen Hui went down to his kitchen and the cook was cutting up an ox. And he's like, down went a shoulder, like up went a knee, and the ox fell apart into pieces. And it just talks about how skillful this chef, this cook, this butcher was at cutting up an ox. And he says, wow, the prince who's observing him is like, wow, you're so skillful. And the cook says, there is no skill, there's only the Tao. When I first started cutting up oxen, I would see the whole ox all in one lump. and I had to learn where the distinctions were. And then after 10 years of cutting oxen, I no longer saw the whole ox, I saw only the distinctions. And now after 20 years, I perceive nothing with my eyes. I feel my way through the ox with the knife. And it's this beautiful, beautiful story. And it also describes how the progression of skill grows and grows till it becomes so efficient that it's invisible, and so internalized that the external appearance becomes irrelevant. I think that's a beautiful story. And I was actually sharing what I just shared about my own progression in making tea the other day, because I was serving tea and a customer asked, do you just pour boiling water on all the teas? I was like, yes, I do. But when you're making this tea at home, follow the temperature on the bag is a good guideline to use. The reason I'm doing what I'm doing is because I've been doing this for so long that the way I do it has changed. I think that's a really salient story. And so let's say that you do this. You spend many decades making tea and make this a part of your life, and you're paying attention and you're enjoying it and you're exploring and you're making mistakes. What does it look like? Let me put this another way. I know people who've been doing that. I know people in China who've been doing that. And what are they like? What does it look like when they serve tea? It just looks like someone serving tea. It looks so ordinary. It looks so natural. It's just like watching a leaf fall off of a tree. It's this very, it can look all kinds of different ways. You could be any kind of person making and drinking tea. You don't have to be Chinese to do Gong Fu Cha. You don't have to be any particular age. You don't have to be any particular ethnicity or gender or anything else. Anyone can do and practice Gong Fu Cha, and anyone can get good at it. And so what it looks like is just pouring tea, pouring water on leaves, drinking it, people enjoying themselves, people having a good time, people laughing, people talking, people being in this harmonized space where there's this kind of magical vibe that you get at the tea house. And we'll talk about this more later in the tea house culture part of this series, of this season. But it's nothing that you see. It's invisible, but you feel it. And what they're doing, it doesn't look, the tea is not necessarily on a pedestal. It might not look any particular way, because the person serving the tea is not drawing attention to the process of serving the tea. They're just serving it and they're letting the tea speak for itself. The expression is the liquid in the cup and everything that comes with that. And they don't have to wear robes, and they don't have to do a bunch of tricks and fancy moves, and they don't have to do it in silence, because what they're doing is something that they've been doing all their lives. And they have internalized that skill so much that it's as natural as breathing to them. And I think that one of the, when I think about the people who I've seen, I'm like, wow, this person is really, really good at pouring tea. And the tea they're making is really special. I can feel the specialness. I can feel their heart. In Chinese, they'd say yong xin. They use their heart. I can feel their heart in this tea. Are usually older people. And that's not an age thing. It's a practice thing. But I'm thinking of like grandma and grandpa in Chaozhou, where Gong Fu Cha is the hometown of Gong Fu Cha. And these retired age people, matriarchs and patriarchs of their family, that they don't have anything to do all day because they're retired, and so they just make and serve tea all day long. And they're out there. Where are they doing it? They don't have a little shrine for it, and they don't go to a tea house either. They're doing it in the street in front of their house. And they've got a folding table and plastic chairs, and they've got their little charcoal stove, and they're wearing flip-flops, and their grandkids are running around with other neighborhood kids, and maybe they're shouting at the kids while they're pouring tea, and they're eating sunflower seeds, and they're laughing and gossiping with their friends. But they pour the tea and it just sparkles in the sunshine, and it looks magical. You can feel it when they pour it, and you drink it and you're like, it washes over your whole body. And you're like, this is a whole other thing. They have made this tea on a whole other level than I can do it. And that's when I think about who is doing this real, that's who I think about. And I'm not saying you need to eat sunflower seeds to be good at making tea. I'm saying that you can look any kind of way, dress any kind of way, act any kind of way, because real Gong Fu is inside. It is the dialogue between the server and the plant. The plant speaks through its taste, its smell, the way it makes you feel. And the server speaks to the plant by the way they pour water on and off of it. And that's that dialogue. And over years of that dialogue and cultivating that relationship, making tea becomes second nature. And that's, to me, what it really looks like to make Gong Fu Cha a part of your life over years and years and years and years. It becomes this very natural, very organic thing, so deeply ingrained that you almost don't notice it happening, but you feel it happening, and it enhances your life and the lives of the people around you. Thank you guys for joining. I really appreciate everyone watching this show and encouraging us to keep making more. We got a lot of people asking when season 3 is going to come out. So here it is. You got it. We're doing it. This has been episode 1. We hope to see you next time. Thank you very much.